As we discussed on the program earlier this month, the heads of the FBI and the UK's MI5 took the unprecedented step of sharing a stage to send a message on the increasing threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to the West. Now, one potential threat from China has been found in North Dakota, where Fufeng USA, the American subsidiary of a Chinese company, purchased more than 300 acres of farmland, including land near the Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is a very strategic Air Force base. Is this just a corn mill, or should we be concerned about the potential for espionage? Joining me to talk about this, Senator Kevin Cramer. He serves on 5 committees, including the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. He represents the state of North Dakota. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Tony, great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity and for raising this important issue.
Before we jump into this, how are you doing? We know you had an accident later on. A lot of folks were praying for you. How are you doing?
Yeah, and the prayers have worked, Tony. Thank you very much. My finger's doing much better. Most of it's still there, and we expect to hang on to the rest of it.
Well, very good. We're glad to hear it because we want you to have all 5. You need it up there on Capitol Hill. All right, let's talk about this. 6 states, including North Dakota, have laws banning foreign ownership of farmland. International investors circumvent this by purchasing U.S. corporations to handle such purchases. Is that what's happened here? And should we be concerned?
Well, I think what's happened here certainly is an international company through an American subsidiary has purchased 370 acres of land, as you say, right in the Red River Valley, very rich farmland, but have purchased it to put a corn milling plant. You rightfully point out the additional challenge of it being 12 miles from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, which is a very important ISR, that's Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance air base. It's a reconnaissance wing, actually. It flies unmanned aerial vehicles, very sophisticated. And then in addition to that, we just launched a new space development agency ground station for working satellites in the low Earth orbit. And of course, there's a lot of important data that goes up and down from space to Earth at Grand Forks. And so that presents an additional challenge. But I think your point about the farmland is an important one, because setting just aside for a moment the very obvious concern about data links between space and Earth at Grand Forks and the opportunity for the Chinese to do what they do very well, and that is steal and spy. Just the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is taking up more assets in the United States, taking up more farm assets. They already, remember, during the pandemic, have a major play in America's livestock industry through packing plants. And we saw how the vulnerability of that supply chain played out during the pandemic. And clearly, when you have 1.5 billion people, food becomes a national security issue. And when you produce a lot of food, food is already a national security issue. So there's lots of things to be concerned about here, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, when we look back at COVID and we look at the concern we had over personal protective equipment that China was producing and holding on to, I mean, why would we let them come to our own country, buy up precious farmland that we need to feed our folks as well as use as exports to feed our allies?
Well, that's a very important question. I think the answer from me anyway is we shouldn't. But at the same time, remembering that we exercise private property rights, we want our farmers and the landowners to be able to do what they want with their own land and be able to take advantage of economic opportunities. That said, we are now talking about a national security risk. And food, like energy, like protective equipment that you referenced, pharmaceutical industry assets, energy. There are lots of things. How about chips? We're having a big battle in the Senate this week over chip manufacturing. There are a lot of things a lot of vulnerabilities that were exposed during the pandemic that we need to be very careful to protect as a national security measure. And certainly food is chief among them, and farmland.
So, Senator, you sent a letter to the Secretary of Treasury requesting a review of the Fufeng Group's purchase. Have you heard anything yet?
I have not heard anything directly, but we stay in regular contact. So the letter is to the Treasury of the Secretary Janet Yellen, who is the chairman of what's called CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. We've asked them to take a review of it. We've included Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who sits on that same committee, along with about 14 other cabinet and White House officials. Normally, agricultural transactions are exempt from CFIUS. They are, in fact, going to take a look at it. And I believe that through that review process, which goes rather quickly, I think a lot of concerns are going to be raised by the various agencies, including the Department of Defense. And that should be enough concern to allow the community and the state to unravel this transaction and claw back whatever incentives they've offered to Fufeng in order to make the investment in Grand Forks. That's my hope. That's my expectation. And if not, then there'll be an investigation beyond that, perhaps. And that ultimately, the President of the United States does have the authority through CFIUS to unravel a transaction that he believes presents more risk than can be mitigated. And I just don't think it'll have to come to that.
Well, you just have to convince him it's a threat to the climate, and then maybe he'll do something.
Well, there's only so much I can do.
Senator, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Always my pleasure. Thank you, Tony.